The harsh crack of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Coloma, California, as Nora Mitchell ducked behind a water trough, her calloused hands clutching a worn satchel of medical supplies. It was 1873, and the small mining town nestled in the heart of El Dorado County had seen its share of violence since the gold rush days, but never had it touched so close to Nora's life. "Miss Mitchell," a voice called out as the shooting subsided. "Are you hurt?" Nora raised her head cautiously, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face with hands that bore the marks of a difficult life, scars from burns, cuts healed poorly, and skin roughened by lye soap and endless labor. At 26, her hands looked decades older than her face, which despite the California sun still held a youthful beauty beneath the weariness. "I'm fine, Sheriff Dawson," she called back, rising to her feet and dusting off her simple blue dress. "Though I can't say the same for my nerves." Sheriff Dawson approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "Those damn Hollister brothers robbed the stage and decided to shoot up half the town on their way out." He glanced at her satchel. "Someone hurt at the boarding house, Mrs. Garcia's boy has a fever," Nora replied, adjusting her grip on the satchel to hide the worst of her scarring, a habit born of years of unwelcome stares. "Nothing serious, but she asked for my help." The sheriff nodded. "You're a blessing to this town, Miss Mitchell. Always tendin' to folks when Doc Weber's too busy with the miners." His eyes softened. "Heard tell a new fellow's staying at the Coloma Hotel. Lucas Montgomery, cattle man from Texas looking to establish a ranch outside town, might bring some stability to the area." Nora nodded politely, though she had little interest in newcomers. In her 7 years in Coloma, she'd learned that men came and went like the seasons, chasing gold or cattle or whatever promised quick riches. None had ever looked twice at a woman whose hands told the story of hardship that her proud bearing tried to conceal. "I best be going, Sheriff. Mrs. Garcia will be worried." As Nora hurried down the dusty street toward the small cluster of houses where most of the Mexican families lived, she was unaware of the tall figure watching her from the hotel porch, a man whose life was about to become unexpectedly entangled with her own. Lucas Montgomery removed his hat and ran a hand through his sun-bleached hair as he observed the woman hurrying away from the aftermath of the shooting. There was something in her determined stride and the careful way she held her satchel that caught his attention amid the chaos of the street. "That's Nora Mitchell," said Henry Weber, the town doctor who stood beside Lucas on the hotel porch. "Finest midwife and healer in El Dorado County, next to myself, of course." The old doctor chuckled. "Came here during the tail end of the rush, no family to speak of. Works herself to the bone caring for folks others might overlook." Lucas nodded, his eyes still following her retreating figure. "Seems like a woman with purpose." "That she is," the doctor agreed. "But don't get any ideas, Montgomery. That woman's heart is locked up tighter than the bank vault." "Too many disappointments, I reckon." Lucas smiled slightly. "I wasn't getting ideas, Doc, just admiring someone who knows their calling." But even as he said it, Lucas knew he was intrigued. At 32, after years of building his cattle business in Texas, he'd come to California seeking new opportunities, and perhaps something he couldn't quite name, something beyond the endless cycle of cattle drives and business deals. Something like roots. 3 days later, Nora was elbow-deep in washtubs behind the boarding house she called home. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she scrubbed the sheets, her scarred hands burning from the harsh soap. 7 years ago, when she'd arrived in Coloma after fleeing an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age in San Francisco, laundry had been her first means of survival. Now, though she made a modest living as a midwife and healer, She still took in washing to make ends meet. Miss Mitchell. The deep voice startled her, and she straightened, wiping her hands instinctively on her apron before realizing it only drew attention to them. A tall man stood at the corner of the boarding house, hat in hand. His clothes were of good quality, not flashy, but well made, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, recognizing him from glimpses around town. "What brings you here?" "Doc Weber speaks highly of your skills," he said, stepping closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "I've got a man back at my camp with a nasty gash on his leg. Fell on some rocks by the river while we were surveying the property. Doc's tending to a berth up at the mining camp, and he suggested I seek you out." Nora hesitated. Going to a camp full of strange men wasn't something she did lightly. Her hard-won independence depended on maintaining proper boundaries. Lucas seemed to read her thoughts. "I can bring him to town if that's better. Just thought it might be easier for you to come to him, given the state of his leg." The genuine concern in his voice decided her. "Let me gather my supplies and speak to Mrs. Farley. I'll need to borrow her wagon." 20 minutes later, they were heading out of town in Mrs. Farley's small wagon. Lucas handled the reins skillfully, while Nora sat stiffly beside him, her medical satchel in her lap and her hands carefully tucked into the folds of her skirt. "How long have you been in California, Mr. Montgomery?" she asked, more to break the uncomfortable silence than from genuine curiosity. "Just shy of a month," he replied. "Spent a few weeks in Sacramento before coming to Coloma. I've purchased land along the South Fork of the American River. Good grazing land with water access. You plan to stay then?" Lucas glanced at her, his blue eyes thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. "I do. Spent enough years drifting with the herds. Time to build something lasting." Nora nodded but said nothing. She'd heard such declarations before, from men who ultimately found the lure of gold or adventure too strong to resist. Coloma had a way of making promises seem possible, then scattering them like dust in the wind. The camp was well organized, with several tents and the beginnings of a cabin foundation laid out near the river. 4 men were working on the structure, while a 5th lay on a cot beneath a canvas awning, his face drawn with pain. "That's Joaquin," Lucas explained as he helped Nora down from the wagon. "Best foreman a man could ask for. Followed me all the way from Texas." Joaquin turned out to be a middle-aged Mexican man with a deep gash running from knee to ankle. Nora worked efficiently, cleaning and stitching the wound while Lucas translated her instructions into Spanish. Though Joaquin spoke some English, pain made communication difficult. "He'll need to stay off this leg for at least a week," Nora said when she finished, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. "The cut is deep but clean. Keep it dry and change the bandage daily." Lucas nodded, watching her hands as she packed her supplies. The scars were more visible now, burn marks across her knuckles, a long healed gash along her right palm, and countless smaller marks telling stories of a hard life. "Thank you, Miss Mitchell. Your reputation is well deserved." She gave a small, tight smile. "It's what I do, Mr. Montgomery." As they walked back to the wagon, Lucas stopped suddenly. "Would you like to see the plans for the ranch since we're here?" Nora hesitated, then nodded. There was something in his straightforward manner that put her at ease, despite her usual caution around new men in town. Lucas led her to a table set up beneath another awning, where blueprints were weighed down with stones. "Main house here," he explained, pointing. "Bunkhouse for the hands over there. Barn and corrals beyond. And here," he indicated a smaller structure near the main house, "a still room and garden for medicinal herbs. My mother was a healer back in Texas. Taught me the value of having medicines close at hand on a working ranch. It's ambitious, Nora remarked, genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness of the design. Life's too short for small dreams, Lucas replied with a smile that transformed his serious face. At least that's what my father always said. As they drove back to town, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road. Nora found herself relaxing slightly, intrigued despite herself by this man who seemed different from the usual fortune seekers who passed through Coloma. "If you don't mind my asking," Lucas said as they neared town, "how did you come to be a healer?" Nora stiffened slightly, but found herself answering honestly. "My mother was a midwife in Boston. She taught me from childhood. When she died, I came west with a family as their children's governess. Plans changed, as they often do out here. I found myself alone in San Francisco, then made my way to Coloma during the latter days of the rush." She didn't mention the near marriage she'd fled, or the desperate months that followed. "And the people here are fortunate for that turn of fate," Lucas said quietly. Back in town, Lucas insisted on paying her well for her services, ignoring her protests. "Joaquin's worth his weight in gold to me. I'd have paid 10 times this to ensure he's properly cared for." As they parted ways outside the boarding house, Lucas hesitated. "Miss Mitchell, I'm hosting a small gathering next Sunday to meet the townspeople properly. Nothing fancy, just a picnic by the river where the ranch is being built. I'd be honored if you'd attend." Nora's first instinct was to refuse. Social gatherings meant hiding her hands, enduring pitying glances, and deflecting unwanted questions. But something in Lucas Montgomery's direct gaze made her reconsider. "I'll try to come, Mr. Montgomery, though I can't promise. Babies have a habit of arriving when least convenient." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I'll hope for cooperative babies then." The week passed in a blur of activity for Nora. A difficult birth at the Palmer farm kept her away for 2 days, and upon her return, she found a basket of fresh fruit on her doorstep with a note thanking her for her help with Joaquin. The gesture was simple but thoughtful, lacking the cloying attention some men thought would impress her. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Nora dressed in her best dress, a sage green cotton with a pattern of tiny leaves, and spent longer than usual arranging her hair. She told herself it was simply respect for the occasion, not for the man who'd extended the invitation. Mrs. Farley, her landlady, watched with knowing eyes. "That new rancher seems a decent sort," she remarked casually. "Not like some who come through here full of big talk and empty pockets." "He seems competent," Nora agreed neutrally, pulling on her gloves worn not for fashion but to hide her scarred hands from curious eyes. The picnic was larger than Nora had expected. Nearly half the town had turned out, spread across the riverside meadow where Lucas was building his ranch. The foundation of the main house was now complete, and tables had been set up in its shadow, laden with food and drink. Lucas spotted her almost immediately, excusing himself from a conversation with the banker to greet her. "Miss Mitchell, you came." His smile was genuine, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I feared some expectant mother might steal you away." "The babies of Coloma have granted me a reprieve, it seems," she replied, finding herself smiling back. "Come, let me introduce you properly to everyone," Lucas said, offering his arm. Nora hesitated, then placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve. The afternoon passed pleasantly as Lucas introduced her to his small crew, all men who had followed him from Texas, and spoke of him with evident respect. She noticed how he made a point of mentioning her healing skills to everyone, emphasizing her importance to the community. As the sun began to set, turning the river to molten gold, Lucas asked if she'd like to see the progress on the house. They walked together through the timber framework, Lucas pointing out where each room would be. "And this," he said, leading her to a small room off what would be the kitchen, "is the still room I mentioned. Southern exposure for drying herbs, shelves along these walls, a work table beneath the window." Nora was touched by the thought he'd put into it. "You've planned carefully." "I've had years to think about the kind of home I wanted to build," he said quietly. "Not just a house, but a place where people would feel welcome, where good work could be done." Something in his tone made her look up. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read: interest, certainly, but also a kind of patient understanding that was unfamiliar to her. "Miss Mitchell, Nora, if I may," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "I'd like to call on you properly if you'd permit it." Nora froze, her pulse suddenly racing. "Mr. Montgomery, Lucas," he corrected gently. "Lucas," she conceded. "You don't know me." "I'd like to," he replied simply. "I've watched how you are with people, kind but not soft, generous but not foolish. You've built a life here on your own terms. That's rare, especially for a woman alone." His perception unsettled her. "My life doesn't leave much room for complications." "Is that what I'd be, a complication?" There was a touch of humor in his voice, but his eyes remained serious. "Men usually are," she answered honestly. Lucas laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the empty frame of the house around them. "Fair enough. But I'm not asking for anything complicated, just the chance to know you better. Rides along the river, perhaps. Conversations that don't revolve around injuries or illnesses." Nora looked down at her gloved hands, aware suddenly of how they marked her as different, damaged. "I'm not what you think, Lucas. I think you're exactly who you appear to be," he said quietly. "A strong woman who's weathered storms and built something valuable. The rest, we can discover together." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Sheriff Dawson calling Lucas's name. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. A door opened that Nora had thought permanently closed. Over the next few weeks, Lucas made good on his word. His courtship was respectful and unhurried. He brought her books from Sacramento, medical texts she couldn't afford, and novels that offered brief escape from her demanding life. They rode along the river on Sunday afternoons, Lucas pointing out improvements to the ranch, Nora identifying medicinal plants along the way. She learned that he had lost both parents within a year of each other, his mother to influenza, his father to a heart ailment, leaving him the family ranch in Texas at 25. He'd built it into a successful operation before selling to finance his California dreams. "Why leave something you'd worked so hard to build?" she asked one afternoon as they walked along the river. Lucas was silent for a moment, skipping a stone across the water. "After my parents died, the place never felt the same. Too many ghosts, too many memories. I wanted to build something that was fully mine, something new that could grow in different soil." His honesty encouraged her own. Gradually, Nora shared pieces of her past, her childhood in Boston, her mother's death from consumption when Nora was 16, the journey west with the Blackwell family, who had promised her a position as governess, but abandoned her in San Francisco when Mr. Blackwell found a business opportunity in China. She didn't tell him everything. Not yet about the wealthy merchant who had offered marriage as her only alternative to destitution. Not about her escape to the gold country, or the brutal years that followed working in a laundry where lye and scalding water had scarred her hands. Then in a mining camp kitchen where grease burns and knife slips added to the damage. Not about how she'd traded her last valuable possession, her mother's gold locket, for medical books and supplies to restart her life as a healer. But Lucas was perceptive, filling in the gaps with gentle understanding rather than pressing for details. And always, always, there was the matter of her hands, which she kept carefully gloved in his presence. One evening in late September, nearly 2 months after their first meeting, Lucas invited her to dinner at his nearly completed ranch house. The main structure was finished, though interior work continued. He had hired Mrs. Gallagher from town to cook for the occasion, setting a table on the wide front porch with a view of the sunset over the mountains. "To new beginnings," Lucas toasted, raising his glass of wine. "And solid foundations," Nora returned, nodding toward the impressive house. After dinner, they sat in rocking chairs watching the stars emerge. The night had turned cool, and Lucas draped a blanket over her shoulders, his hand lingering briefly. "Nora," he said softly, "there's something I've been wanting to ask." Her heart quickened. Over the past weeks, she had begun to feel things she'd thought impossible: hope, longing, a tentative trust. Yet she still held part of herself back, protected behind walls built from past disappointments. "Why do you always wear gloves with me?" he asked, surprising her. "I've seen you working without them, delivering babies, treating injuries, even doing laundry, but never with me." Nora looked down at her gloved hands, a knot forming in her throat. This was the moment she'd been avoiding, the revelation that would surely change how he saw her. "My hands." She began, then faltered. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently took one of her hands in his. "May I?" After a long moment, Nora nodded. With infinite care, Lucas removed the glove, then the other, revealing her hands in the soft lamplight. The scars were stark burn marks across the knuckles, poorly healed cuts creating a web of white lines, calluses built upon calluses from years of labor. They were the hands of someone who had fought for survival, not the soft, unblemished hands expected of a lady. Nora held her breath, waiting for the usual reaction: discomfort poorly disguised as pity, or worse, disgust. Instead, Lucas turned her hands over in his, studying them with something like reverence. His touch was gentle as he traced a long scar that ran across her right palm. "These hands have delivered new life," he said softly. "They've eased pain and mended what was broken." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "They're beautiful, Nora." Something broke open inside her, a dam holding back years of shame and self-consciousness. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "No one has ever," she whispered, unable to finish. "Then everyone has been blind," Lucas said firmly. He raised her right hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the scarred knuckles. "These hands tell your story, one of courage and perseverance. How could I not find beauty in that?" That night marked a turning point. For the first time since arriving in Coloma, Nora began to feel that she might belong somewhere, not just as the useful healer, but as a woman worthy of love despite her scars, perhaps even because of them. As autumn deepened, their courtship flourished. Lucas completed his house and moved in properly, though the stillroom remained unfinished. "I'm saving that for you," he told her. "It should be built to your specifications." The statement held implications that both thrilled and frightened Nora. She found herself dreaming of a future that once seemed impossible: a partnership built on mutual respect, a home that was truly hers, perhaps even children to love and teach as her mother had taught her. But November brought challenges that tested their growing bond. A typhoid outbreak in the mining camps north of town claimed several lives before Nora and Doc Weber could contain it. For 2 weeks, she worked day and night, returning to her room at the boarding house only for brief periods of rest. Lucas brought food to the makeshift infirmary they'd established, helped move patients, and boiled endless pots of water without complaint. When Nora finally collapsed from exhaustion, it was Lucas who carried her home and stood firm against her weak protests that she was needed. "You can't help anyone if you're dead on your feet," he said bluntly, tucking blankets around her. "Sleep. I'll wake you if there's an emergency." She slept for 14 hours straight, waking to find Lucas dozing in a chair beside her bed, one of her medical books open on his lap. He had been learning. She realized, studying remedies and treatments so he could better understand her work. The epidemic finally burned itself out in early December. The night after they closed the infirmary, snow fell on Coloma, the first of the season. Lucas invited Nora to dinner at the ranch to celebrate their success and the return of normal life. The house was warm and inviting, a fire crackling in the large stone fireplace. Lucas had decorated for Christmas with pine boughs and red ribbons, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. After dinner, they sat before the fire, a comfortable silence between them. "I had this made for you," Lucas said suddenly, handing her a small wooden box. "Consider it an early Christmas gift." Inside was a silver pendant on a delicate chain, a perfect replica of the yarrow flower, known for its healing properties. "Lucas, it's beautiful," she breathed, touching it reverently. "Turn it over." On the back was a simple inscription: "Healing hands, healing heart." "I know what you lost to become who you are today," Lucas said quietly. "Your mother's locket. Doc Weber told me how you traded it for your first medical supplies here. I can't replace that heirloom, but perhaps this can be the start of a new tradition." Nora blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll marry me," Lucas said, taking her scarred hands in his. "Not because you need protection or security, you've proven you can provide those for yourself, but because together we could build something extraordinary. A home that heals, a partnership of equals." He slipped from the sofa to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Nora Mitchell, your strength humbles me. Your hands tell the story of a woman who has never given up, never stopped fighting for what matters. I love those hands and the woman they belong to. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Nora looked into his eyes and saw no pity, no conditions, only love and admiration. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her scars didn't diminish her worth but testified to her resilience. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Lucas's face lit with joy as he slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small emerald that matched her eyes. Then he cupped her face and kissed her, a kiss that promised healing for wounds deeper than any visible scar. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Coloma, with most of the town in attendance. Nora wore a dress of deep ivory satin, and at Lucas's insistence, no gloves. Her bouquet of winter greenery and dried yarrow covered her scarred hands in photographs, but she held them proudly uncovered during the ceremony. Doc Weber gave her away, his eyes suspiciously damp behind his spectacles. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered as they walked down the aisle. "And so am I." Their first months as husband and wife were both idyllic and challenging. Winter storms isolated the ranch several times, and spring brought flooding along the river that threatened their newly planted fields. Through it all, they worked as partners, Lucas respecting Nora's need to continue her healing work in town, Nora helping to establish the ranch as a place of welcome and prosperity. The stillroom was completed in March, designed exactly to Nora's specifications. Lucas surprised her with seeds and cuttings of medicinal herbs from as far away as San Francisco, and together they planted a healing garden that would eventually supply remedies to the entire county. By their first anniversary, Nora was with child. The pregnancy was difficult, her body rebelling against the new life growing within after years of deprivation and hard labor. Lucas was a constant presence, learning from Doc Weber how to help manage her symptoms, reading medical texts late into the night to understand what was happening. Their son, William Henry Montgomery, was born after a grueling 36-hour labor in late September 1874. Named for both their fathers, he had Lucas's blue eyes and Nora's determined chin. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, cradling his son while Nora rested. "Strong like his mother." Motherhood brought new challenges and joys for Nora. She reduced her midwifery work temporarily, but continued to treat patients at the ranch, where Lucas had converted a small cabin into a proper clinic. Word spread throughout El Dorado County of the healing woman at Montgomery Ranch, and people came from miles around seeking her remedies and gentle care. Their family grew with the addition of a daughter, Catherine Rose, in 1877. Unlike her brother's difficult birth, Catherine arrived quickly and with minimal fuss, as if eager to join the family. She inherited her mother's green eyes and her father's easy laugh. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Lucas's careful management and innovative breeding practices made Montgomery cattle sought after throughout California. The house expanded to accommodate not only their family but frequent guests, travelers, patients, and friends from town. Nora's scarred hands became legendary in their own right. Mothers would tell their children, "Those hands brought you into this world," and minors would display their own scars, saying, "Miss Nora stitched me up good as new." What had once been a source of shame became a badge of honor, a visible testament to a life of service. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas presented Nora with a surprise: a fully equipped medical clinic built on their property, with rooms for patients who needed overnight care. "The Montgomery Healing House," he announced, showing her the wooden sign he'd commissioned. "A place where anyone can come for help, regardless of means." Nora was speechless, overwhelmed by this tangible expression of his support for her work. "Lucas, this must have cost a fortune." "What's fortune for, if not to build something meaningful?" he replied, echoing words he'd spoken years before. "Besides, this is an investment. With Doc Weber retiring next year, El Dorado County needs a proper medical facility. Who better to run it than the finest healer in California?" The clinic flourished under Nora's direction. She hired 2 young women as assistants and trained them in midwifery and basic medical care. Lucas managed the business side, ensuring the clinic was financially sustainable while maintaining Nora's principle that no one would be turned away for lack of funds. In 1885, 12 years into their marriage, tragedy struck when William, then 10, fell from his horse during a thunderstorm and was swept away in the flooded river. For 3 desperate days, search parties combed the riverbanks. Lucas rode without sleep, while Nora kept vigils, her hands those hands that had healed so many clasped in helpless prayer. On the 3rd day, they found him miraculously alive, clinging to a fallen tree 2 miles downstream. He had a broken leg and pneumonia from exposure, but his Montgomery stubbornness had kept him fighting for survival. As Nora tended her son through the weeks of recovery that followed, she realized how completely her life had transformed from the lonely, guarded existence she'd known before Lucas. Her scarred hands, once hidden in shame, now moved with confidence as they set bones, administered medicines, and soothed fevered brows. They were the same hands, bearing the same marks, but her perception of them had been forever changed by a man who saw beauty where others saw only damage. One evening, as William slept peacefully after his fever finally broke, Lucas found Nora on the porch, staring at her hands in the fading light. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, sitting beside her. "I was thinking about the first time you held my hands," she replied. "How terrified I was to let you see them." Lucas smiled, taking those beloved hands in his. "Best moment of my life, the day you finally trusted me enough to see all of you. "I still don't understand sometimes," Nora admitted, "how you could look at these scars and see beauty." "Because they tell our story," Lucas said simply. "Without these hands and everything they endured, you wouldn't be the woman I fell in love with. You wouldn't be the healer who saved countless lives, including our sons. Every scar is a chapter in the book of us, Nora." He raised her hands to his lips, kissing each knuckle as he had that first night. "And I love every word of that story." As the sun set over the American River, casting golden light across the land they had built together, Nora leaned against her husband's shoulder. Her scarred hands rested in his, not hidden, not shameful, but treasured. Hands that had endured, healed, loved, and built a life more beautiful than she had ever dared to dream. "I love you, Lucas Montgomery," she whispered. "And I love you, Nora Montgomery," he replied. Scarred hands, healing heart and all. The years continued to unfold for the Montgomery family. William recovered fully from his ordeal and grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's head for business and his mother's compassion. Catherine, 3 years younger, developed a keen interest in medicine, following Nora on her rounds from an early age. The Montgomery Ranch prospered, becoming one of the largest and most respected cattle operations in Northern California. Lucas's innovative breeding programs and fair business practices earned him a seat on the California Cattlemen's Association, while Nora's clinic gained recognition throughout the state as a model of rural health care. In 1890, at Catherine's 13th birthday celebration, Lucas announced a surprise that would change their lives once again. He had purchased the building that housed Doc Weber's old practice in Coloma and was donating it to the town as a permanent medical facility, the Nora Montgomery Hospital. "This town gave us our start," he told the gathered friends and neighbors. "It seems only right to ensure its future." Nora, now 43, her chestnut hair threaded with silver but her green eyes as bright as ever, was overwhelmed by the gesture. The small girl who had once hidden her scarred hands would now have her name on a building dedicated to healing. "I don't know what to say," she whispered to Lucas as the townspeople applauded. "Say you'll help me make it the finest small hospital in California," he replied with the same confidence that had first drawn her to him 17 years earlier. The hospital opened the following spring, with Nora dividing her time between it and the clinic at the ranch. Catherine, despite her youth, proved an able assistant, absorbing medical knowledge like a sponge. By 15, she could set simple fractures and stitch wounds under Nora's supervision. "She has your hands, Mama," William remarked once, watching his sister work. "Not the scars, but the way they move so sure and steady." Nora smiled, touched by the observation. "Let's hope she never has to earn the scars." The turn of the century brought both celebration and reflection to the Montgomery household. Lucas, now 59, had silver at his temples but remained strong and vital. Nora, at 53, found her healing work more rewarding than ever as new medical advances reached even their rural corner of California. William, at 26, had married Emma Thompson, the schoolteacher's daughter, and taken over much of the ranch's management. Catherine, 23, had just returned from 2 years of formal medical training in San Francisco, one of the few women in her class. On New Year's Eve 1899, as they gathered on the porch of the home Lucas had built with such care, he raised a glass in toast. "To the new century, and to the hands that built our life together." All eyes turned to Nora's hands, still scarred but now worn with age as well, the fingers slightly bent from decades of work. She had long since stopped noticing the scars herself, seeing instead what Lucas had taught her to see: evidence of a life fully lived. "To healing hands," Catherine added, raising her own glass. And to the parents who taught me that true beauty lies in how we use them to help others. Later that night, as Nora and Lucas stood alone watching the first stars of the new century appear, he took her hands in his as he had countless times before. "Regrets?" he asked softly. Nora shook her head, looking out over the ranch that had become the center of their world, the house with its many additions, the clinic, where she had delivered a generation of El Dorado County's children, the gardens that supplied medicines for the sick. Beyond, she could see the lights of Coloma, where the hospital that bore her name stood as testament to a life of service. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every scar led me here, to you, to our children, to this life we've built together." Lucas smiled, the same smile that had first warmed her cautious heart in the frame of an unfinished house long ago. "Do you remember what I told you the first time I held these beautiful hands? You said they told our story," Nora replied, leaning into his embrace. "That every scar was a chapter in the book of us. The best book ever written," Lucas murmured against her hair, "and we're still adding chapters." As the new century dawned over Coloma, the woman with scarred hands and the cowboy who had seen their beauty stood together, their story far from finished, a testament to the healing power of love that looks beyond surface wounds to the strength beneath.